Well, good morning. My name is Tomicah Tillemann, and along with a significant portion of the people in this room, I am one of the many Lantos grandchildren. It is my privilege to welcome all of you to the presentation of the 2013 Lantos Prize for Human Rights. Our honoree this year is in the business of shattering ceilings, and that is a trend that continues today. Secretary Clinton will be the first woman and the first American by birth ever awarded the Lantos Prize. When it comes to human rights, there is no worthy cause that she has not championed and no corner of the globe that her service has not improved. I should also note that Tom Lantos adored Hillary Clinton, and he followed her activities with an intensity that was usually reserved for his family. On behalf of that family, and in the case of the Lantoses, we're talking about a whole lot of people, we want to thank you for your work to advance the ideals that also defined our grandfather's legacy. Secretary Albright, we are deeply grateful for your leadership on human rights as well. My grandfather would often note that as we work to advance the frontiers of freedom, we stand on the shoulders of giants. One of those giants left us yesterday. Like my grandfather, Nelson Mandela's commitment to human rights was forged in fires of almost indescribable inhumanity. The evil of apartheid or the Holocaust could have easily incinerated the decency in both of these men. Instead, they met evil with good and emerged from affliction with a determination to lift up humankind. At one point during our time together at the State Department, I had the opportunity to accompany Secretary Clinton to South Africa. Her first stop was the home of Nelson Mandela, and I know that my grandfather made a similar pilgrimage. As we begin today's ceremony, I'd ask you to join me in a moment of silence in memory of President Mandela. Thank you. Secretary Clinton has established a pattern in her public service. It's never mattered to her whether an issue was as old as brutality itself or at the leading edge of innovation. If it had an impact on human rights, it was on her agenda. Days after our visit to South Africa, she ventured into the depths of fighting in the Democratic Republic of Congo, determined to combat a pandemic of gender-based violence that was shredding the social fabric of that nation. A few months later, we watched as she moved the fight for human rights to the frontiers of cyberspace and became the first American official to define the landscape of freedom in the internet age. We saw that she would go any distance and face down any foe, helping humanity build a more civil society. We live in a world that's in desperate need of that brand of moral fortitude. It's a strength we witnessed in my grandfather and Secretary Clinton. It's a strength you bring to us today. Our welcome remarks this morning will come from a woman who I know from experience has that same type of grit, my mother, Annette Lantos Tillemann-Dick. Her remarks will be followed by a brief film on the work of the Lantos Foundation.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the presentation of the Tom Lantos Prize. In the last 2 weeks, various responsibilities have caused me to travel with children and grandchildren by car from Denver, Colorado to New Haven, Connecticut to Washington, D.C., back to Denver, Colorado, and 2 days later to fly back to Washington, D.C. At the outset, I thought, I'm pretty exhausted, and then I thought about the recipient of our prize today. And I thought in a whole new way about the schedule that she kept while she was Secretary of State, and I recognized her for what she truly is, a modern-day superwoman. It was very humbling to understand what Hillary Clinton has done in her efforts to advance what is important in this world. She has worked, wearing herself in working to build civic infrastructures around the world that will give all women, all men, online and offline, the opportunity to come together to advance the principles and purposes that matter most to them. For centuries, women have labored, often with little apparent recognition, to nurture the seeds of integrity, responsibility, faith, and vision in our offspring and others. Hillary Clinton has carried forward the work of women by honoring and fighting for those aspirations for our children, for the girls and boys everywhere. She has recognized in a new way the need to cultivate what is called civil society, the many non-governmental groups that promote the lives, liberties, and pursuits of happiness that make our lives worth living. Hillary understands that the fuel of freedom flows from the passionate hearts of the countless millions, maybe billions of activists, anonymous activists who give themselves to improving life in their homes, in their schools, in their communities, countries, and the world. She has, through strengthening infrastructures we call civil society, worked to provide safe spaces for those of all nations and persuasions to come together to promote peacefully and constructively what matters most to them. That is what brings us together today. The quest for this kind of place drove my father from the flames of the Holocaust and oppression of communism to the United States almost 70 years ago. In his last days, though he had lost his appetite for much of what the world offers in the way of food, drink, and entertainment, he still had a voracious appetite for news of Hillary. Before he died, with great dignity, he gathered our family together and emphatically told us he had given his all for his family, for his country, and for his causes. And then he exhorted us to do the same. Hillary Clinton has been giving her all. She now joins the Dalai Lama, Elie Wiesel, Paul Rusesabagina, and the inimitable Cheng Wan-chen as the 5th recipient of the Lantos Prize. I can almost hear my father shouting from his celestial skybox, "Bravo!"
Madeleine Albright is the State Department's original ceiling smasher. Throughout her life, she made a habit of breaking new ground, eventually serving as America's first woman Secretary of State. In many ways, Secretary Albright's childhood made her an improbable candidate for a senior U.S. government post. She was born in Prague and spent much of her early life as a refugee from the Nazis and later the communists, before finally emigrating to the United States. Partly because of the close parallels in their personal stories, my grandfather always felt a deep connection to Secretary Albright. I remember accompanying him to lunch at Secretary Albright's residence during her time at the United Nations in New York. For days before and after, my grandfather kept telling me how fortunate our nation was to have a leader with her perspective. Years later, when she worked to prevent genocide in Kosovo, millions of other Americans recognized that truth as well. Walter Isaacson wrote at the time that because of the worldview bred into her bones and seared into her heart growing up, she believed that America's interests cannot be easily separated from its values. The Lantos Prize exists in part to remind us of that fact, and I know that my grandfather would be thrilled, Secretary Albright, that you are here to present the award today. Please join me in welcoming our 64th Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tomicah, for your kind words, and good morning. Thank you to all of you. I am thrilled to be here. We're here to celebrate those who've dedicated their lives to the human rights movement, and we would be remiss if we did not speak, as Tomicah did a little while ago, to honor the passing of one of the movement's greatest. President Mandela was an activist, a prisoner of conscience, a political leader, a venerated statesman, and he was above all a teacher. And he taught us that the power of forgiveness is greater than the power of hate, and that differences of race and nationality matter less than our shared humanity. His presence on this earth will be sorely missed, but his lessons will endure in the hearts of millions. And this has, in fact, become a very special event as part of what Tom talked about an awful lot. And so it is a sadness that Nelson Mandela has passed from this world, but it is very much the same kind of story that Tom Lantos talked about so much. We come together because of this extraordinary trailblazer, a man who's admired from San Mateo to Washington to Budapest. But as much as we're all in awe of Tom, Tom was in awe of his family, and what a wonderful big family it is. If you spend more than 5 minutes talking to him, you knew all about his 17 grandchildren and 2 daughters, and he would even include his dogs from throughout the years in the head count, from Benji and Gigi to Matsko. But when asked about how he defined himself, Tom said, "First and foremost, I think of myself as the husband of a remarkable woman." It was so clear how much he loved Annette more than anything, and the nearly 60 years they spent married together only brightened that twinkle in his eye. And so thank you, Annette, for having me at this special event and for our friendship. We have maintained that through the years. We've traveled together a lot. And for everything that you do to make sure that the human rights torch that Tom lit with you stays lit. Tom once said he was a humble worker in the vineyard of the enterprise to make this world a saner place. But we all know the truth, that he had a unique call to conscience, a permanent vigilance against discrimination, genocide, oppression, and anti-Semitism. As Annette says, he was democracy's staunchest defender, and that was the core value of his existence. But you may not know that he was also a staunch defender of the rights of women. He led the charge to expand access to health care for women in Africa. He promoted reproductive health in the United States and around the world, and he asked the tough questions of those who obstructed women's progress and rights, even when it didn't make news. So I'm especially delighted that we honor a dear friend of mine with this award that bears his name. It's been nearly 20 years since I joined Secretary Clinton at the Fourth World Conference on Women. And her simple, universal message, human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, became a mantra for so many women denied the opportunity to live with freedom and dignity. That rainy day in Beijing is now a watershed moment in the history of the women's rights movement. But even before that defining speech and ever since, Hillary has been expanding the frontiers of human rights and pushing back against inequality both around the world and here at home. She understands that women's rights are human rights, but also women's progress is human progress. Because we all benefit when women have the chance to participate fully in every aspect of life. The world needs the wisdom and strength and vision of all its people, not half. People say that democracy, for all its limitations, is the greatest force for peace and prosperity. And I know Hillary truly believes that. But she also knows that denying women their rights is one of the greatest forces against peace and prosperity. She knows this because she has seen it firsthand. In her most recent incarnation as Secretary of State, she carried the American flag to over 100 countries and delivered a message directly to its women, even if it rattled the government. She said, "I stand with you in your fight to shatter your glass ceilings. The United States stands with you." And they believed her because she has shattered almost every glass ceiling in her way. And now she's pushing this work forward with her No Ceilings initiative at the Clinton Foundation. which looks back at how far we have come since Beijing and forward to the progress we still have to make. Because if we can help give women the power to make choices for their families, communities, and countries, the cycle of poverty can be broken, health education improved, and societies are better off. So it behooves us, those of us who live in places where we have economic and political voice, to help other women. But as much as the world today needs good leaders, it needs vision. Hillary is such a visionary. So much so, she's been even channeled her long-departed predecessor, Eleanor Roosevelt. But she really does take after our mutual hero. Those of us who have seen her abroad know that she doesn't just make appearances with other women for the sake of it. She really connects. Sometimes, when she meets women's rights leaders in countries that are oppressive, they ask her if they can get a picture with her, because they know that a picture with Hillary Clinton means that they will not get harassed, abused, or attacked. She is the protector. I could go on and on about the awards she's won and the initiatives she's started and the miles she's traveled and lives that she's changed and rights that she's defended. But to me, the most powerful illustration of her example and influence is the fact that a simple picture with her can save a life. It should come as a surprise to absolutely no one that this woman, who is qualified for everything, has proven to be an outstanding mother and wife and daughter and advocate and lawyer, First Lady, Senator, and Secretary of State, and a really good friend. Hillary has the ability, unlike anybody else, to look past the everyday to help expand women's rights and human rights and people's rights, and to speak out on behalf of the voiceless. I have always said that there's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other. So, Madam Secretary, Madam Secretary, although it's 100 years away, I think that there's a special place for you next to Eleanor Roosevelt. Congratulations on this special award.